Consider a tower, built to watch, raised on law. Faelen's tower did not fall, no alarms rang, no walls were breached. A captain rode away, and it was handed over. Men simply chose warmth, closeness, and freedom over vigilance.
Dawn arrived over Faelen's tower, and Rellan had been awake for most of it already. He stood on the eastern walk with his hands resting on the stone and his breath ghosting faintly before him. He watched the sky above the low fields and the darker line of trees beyond. The tower was still new enough that the stone smelled different when the air was damp. Not old dust and lichen yet. It had a cleaner, quarried scent. Lord Geffroy had wanted it to feel solid and enduring, and Rellan supposed it did. Below him the yard lay quiet, as a couple of lanterns burned low near the gate. The men who had come on duty with him were mostly locals, drawn from Faelen's watch itself and the surrounding small holdings. He knew their names, their habits, and which ones would complain about the cold, as well as those who would not even notice it. He had grown up with some of them. With others, he had shared ale, debts, or small favours. The watch captain liked to remind them that they now served Geffroy's law as well as their own good sense, but it was the latter that still seemed to matter more. Rellan told himself he was tired because the watch rotation had been altered again, nothing more than that. Footsteps sounded behind him, but he did not turn. He already knew the rhythm. "You're favouring your right foot," said Jotum, coming to stand beside him. Jotum had joined the watch only a season after Rellan, and though he was broader in the shoulder and quicker to laugh, he shared Rellan's habit of noticing small things and worrying about them longer than was useful. "It's colder on this side," Rellan replied. "The stone keeps it, so I move." Jotum leaned on the parapet and looked out toward the fields. "You'd think they'd have finished the outer wall by now," he said. "Geffroy promised." "Geffroy promises a lot of things," Rellan said, an edge creeping into his voice. Jotum glanced at him. "You all right?" Rellan nodded, then paused. "Just didn't sleep much." "Because of them?" Jotum asked. Rellan could see the low shapes of the temporary dwellings that had sprung up near the base of the tower over the last few weeks. Tents at first, then lean-tos, then something closer to huts. Built oddly, though, with angles that did not quite square, and entrances that seemed to turn away from the eye. Smoke curled from one of them now, carrying a scent that was not wood alone. "They've got papers," Rellan said at last. "Captain's seen them, seals and all." "Aye," Jotum said. "Doesn't mean I like the look of them." "No," Rellan agreed. "Me neither." The arrival of Belnoric Rootcaster and his followers had been quiet. A small procession at first, men and women alike, none armed in any obvious way. Their carts were light and their manner deferential. They had presented their papers to Captain Venn with careful respect, speaking Geffroy's name often. They had permission, it was true, to reside near the tower for a time, to conduct observations and advise. The words had been precise, but without being terribly clear. "You'll find we keep our hours differently," Rootcaster had said, "but we'll try not to trouble yours." They had troubled them anyway, though never directly. Watches were disrupted because someone had overslept or volunteered to trade. Men loitered at the parapets when they should have been relieved. Tasks were completed, but without the old sense of urgency. Rellan could not have said when it began, only that it had. A shout rose from the yard, as the relief watch assembled. Captain Venn emerged from the tower door, looking markedly older than he had when he arrived from Geffroy, even though it had been less than a year. Rellan descended the stair and joined the others as they gathered. The captain ran through the formalities quickly, his tone efficient but distracted. When he dismissed them, some of the men drifted toward the cookhouse, others toward the gate. Rellan hesitated, then found himself walking instead toward the edge of the encampment. One of Rootcaster's people was awake there, a woman seated on a low stool. She sat close to a fire. She was young, with black hair that fell loose down her back. Her face was fine-boned, the sort that did not need stillness to be striking. The fire caught the lines of her body through the cling of her clothing. She sat easily, her posture unashamed of its own presence. Rellan became acutely aware of her warmth, the way her breath lifted her chest, and the long line of her neck exposed where her hair slipped aside. The sight of her stirred something in him, not tender or romantic, but a blunt bodily want that surprised him with its force. He told himself it was fatigue after a long watch, causing his mind to wander. Yet when she looked up at him with those dark eyes, he felt a certainty that she knew exactly what had passed through him, and that it pleased her. "Morning," she said, as though they were old acquaintances. "Morning," Rellan replied, then stopped, uncertain what he had meant to say next. "You're early," she observed. "I've been on watch," he said. "So you have," she said, and smiled. "Do you always stand so high to greet the day?" "Someone has to." "Of course," she replied. "Someone always does." She made room on the bench beside her without explicitly inviting him to sit. Rellan remained standing, aware suddenly of his boots and the mud on his cloak. He realized with a flush of embarrassment that he had thought about how he looked before he thought about why he had come. "What is it you're doing here?" he asked, more bluntly than he intended. She stared into the fire, watching, listening, waiting. "For what?" "For when things show themselves," she replied. Rellan frowned. "We're here to watch," he said. "That's our purpose." "Yes, I know," she resumed her humming. Rellan became aware of how tired he was. He thought of how long it had been since he had stood anywhere without knowing exactly what was expected of him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Alurinai," she said. "And yours?" "Rellan." She smiled again. "You've lived here a long time?" "All my life." "Then this place is part of you, more than you might think." He laughed, a short sound. "It's a tower and some fields. And is that all it's ever been?" "I should go," he said. Alurinai nodded. "We'll still be here." By the time he reached the cookhouse later, the others were already eating. Jotum waved him over, making space on the bench. Someone slid a bowl toward him, and Rellan ate mechanically, his thoughts still hooked on the encounter. "You look like you've been somewhere else," Jotum said, around a mouthful of bread. "Just tired," Rellan said again. "That's becoming your answer for everything." Before Rellan could respond, Captain Venn entered, his presence quieting the room. He took a cup from the shelf and poured himself ale, though it was barely past dawn. "Listen," he said, addressing them all. "Rootcaster has asked permission to conduct a small observance at the tower's base this morning. It's within his remit. No interference. Keep your distance." Murmurs rippled through the room, and someone swore. "What kind of observance, sir?" Jotum asked. Venn thought a moment. He didn't specify. Rellan felt a flicker of irritation. "With respect, Captain, this is our watch." When Venn replied, his voice was tired. "And Geffroy's authority," he said, "which he carries. We do our duty by recognizing that." Rellan subsided, though the unease remained. They assembled again in the yard not long after. Rootcaster and his followers gathered near the tower's base. They marked the ground with chalk and ash. The patterns meant nothing to Relan, even as his eyes tried to follow them. Some of the watch stood with arms folded, others leaned on their weapons, but all of them were silent. Rootcaster then raised his voice and began to speak strange words and chant. Relan found himself listening to it, but his thoughts drifted. He next became aware of Alurani standing near him, though he had not seen her approach. She came close and held onto his arm. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "Hear what?" "The way the tower listens," she said. He frowned. "It's stone." "Stone listens. It remembers everything." He wanted to argue, but he found himself watching Rootcaster trace a hand along the tower's wall, his fingers moving in a way that made Relan feel uncomfortable. The sun rose fully, light striking the tower's upper courses and turning them pale gold. The observance ended without any clear conclusion. Rootcaster bowed slightly toward the watch, thanked Captain Venn for his forbearance, and withdrew. The men dispersed, some grumbling, others thoughtful. Relan remained where he was for a moment longer, thinking about Alurani's words and her touch. That afternoon he missed a signal call. Not deliberately. He had been standing at his post, watching the road, when he realized that he had been thinking of Alurani's humming and the way it had calmed him. The horn lay at his side, untouched. Jotum had covered the call for him. "You're drifting," Jotum said later, concerned for his friend. "So are you," Relan replied, before he could stop himself. Jotum looked away. "Maybe." Relan returned from the second dawn watch with the taste of cold still in his mouth. The tower behind him was already stirring, but he found his feet carrying him away from it. The encampment lay quiet at this hour, its ramshackle collection of structures holding the last of the night, reluctant to let it go. Alurini's dwelling stood apart from the others, a small structure raised from timber frames and clad in layered hides and woven reed panels. The seams were stitched tight against wind and sound. It had been set carefully, its entrance angled away from the tower itself. A narrow, shuttered opening near the roof let out a thread of smoke, and the door, hanging on pegs, was closed. He paused there longer than he meant to, aware of how foolish he must look, standing there in silence. She spoke before he announced his presence. "You can come in," she said, as though she had been expecting him. He hesitated, then pushed the flap aside and ducked through. The space within was warmer than he expected. The air held mingled sweet scents he could not name. Alurini stood near the fire, barefoot, her hair unbound, wearing a loose linen shift that hung from her shoulders. "You shouldn't," he said, and heard how unconvincing it sounded, even to himself. She looked at him steadily. "You're finished for the morning, Relan." "That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means," she replied, "and what it doesn't." An awkward silence stretched between them. Relan became acutely aware of his hands, unsure where to put them, and of the dull thud of his heart. She stepped nearer, not touching him, only moving close enough that he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. Then, without looking away, she reached up and drew the shift over her head. For a moment, Relan could not move. The firelight traced her in soft contours, revealing the softness of her body, the gentle swell of her breasts, the curve of her hips, and the long, easy lines of her legs. There was nothing coy in the way she stood. She neither posed nor shielded herself, and that openness struck him harder than any display might have done. Desire rose in him with a sudden, undeniable urgency. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. That was enough. Whatever words might have followed seemed unnecessary. He stepped forward to meet her, and the rest unfolded, as such things do when thought gives way to instinct. When he emerged later into the daylight, the tower loomed as it always had, but Relan knew for certain that something in him had already slipped and would not be set back so easily. The seventh dawn came clear and pale, and Relan was on the western walk when he saw Captain Ven riding out alone. The captain's helm was uncrested, and his posture rigid in the saddle. There was no escort, no call to assemble, no word passed to the men on duty. Relan watched until the figure diminished, and the sound of hooves was swallowed by the distance. Only then did he realize how quiet the tower had become. No one remarked on the absence. No one even asked where the captain had gone, or when he might return. Below, the encampment was already stirring. Fires burned openly now, and figures moved between the dwellings. Some of the watchmen drifted down from the tower, unarmed and without their cloaks, greeting Rootcaster's people by name. Others did not leave the tower at all, but returned with company, laughter echoing oddly in stairwells meant for orders and alarms. Relan passed a doorway on the second level and caught a glimpse of two bodies entwined on a pallet meant for one. He recognized the watchman by the scar on his face. The woman beside him was another of Rootcaster's followers, her dark hair loose, her hand resting with casual ownership on the man's chest. Neither looked ashamed. The door closed before Relan could think to turn away. In the yard, Jotum stood talking with a woman he had never brought into the tower before. His hand rested at the small of her back, as though it belonged there. When he noticed Relan watching, he only smiled and shrugged, as if to say that this too was now ordinary. Relan crossed the yard and followed the familiar path toward the encampment, moving toward what felt inevitable. Alurini was seated on the low bed inside her dwelling, her hair loose, her expression calm. His arrival was neither a surprise nor a triumph. "You don't have to stand guard here," she said. He removed his cloak and set it aside, the gesture feeling strangely final. He lay beside her, the contact unadorned and deeply certain. There was comfort in the closeness and the absence of instruction. This was what he wanted, or at least what he no longer wished to resist. Outside, the sounds of the encampment rose and fell, voices blending, and laughter threading through the morning air. While the tower above filled with new occupants and looser rules, Rootcaster moved through its upper chambers alone. He entered Captain Ven's quarters and found that the room was neat and orderly, with the bed made and the table cleared of anything personal. The captain had left nothing behind that mattered. Rootcaster set a small object at the centre of the table. It glowed, a green light pulsing softly from within. He immersed himself in it for a moment, his expression thoughtful, but soon changing to a private, satisfied smile. Outside, the tower stood whole against the morning sky, its purpose intact in stone, if not in spirit now. The watch still wore its colours, the road still lay open. But by the time the sun cleared the fields, Faelen's tower no longer belonged to the men who had been set to keep it, and no one thought to ask when or how that had happened.
The greatest losses are not taken by force. They are given away, piece by piece, by those who mistake comfort for safety and permission for authority. When vigilance becomes optional, the watch is already over.